Good morning and welcome to the WAVY Digital Desk. I'm your host, Sarah Good. Today we're going to be talking about mental health with kids in social media. We have Dr. Elise Faluco here who's going to talk about, what she knows as the expert, obviously, and how she handles these situations, maybe advice she gives to parents and so forth. So I'm going to bring her on in a second. If you will, comment any questions in the chat, whether you're on YouTube or on Facebook, and we can try to get to them, throughout the conversation. If you want more resources, there is a link right now that is up on WAVY.com, YouTube, and Facebook for you to find out more on WAVY.com during and after this conversation. I'm going to bring a guest on now. Dr. Faluco, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Sarah.
Absolutely. And you're with CHKD and you're a child and adolescent psychiatrist. Can you tell us a little bit about your role, even just, what you see beyond mental health, but sort of just your expertise?
Sure. So I help take care of kids with, anything ranging from ADHD, anxiety, depression, a little bit of bipolar. And so I see kids and teenagers and specialize more in the teenage range as they're going through developmental transitions and try to support them and also provide treatment recommendations and medication when indicated.
And especially in this cyber technology world that a lot of, especially those teens, find themselves in sort of every day, it seems either a new app or new, fake image or some sort of controversy that's sort of popping up. I guess I just want to jump in first with, how long have you really seen this either been an issue or seen, kids sort of struggling to navigate this?
Oh my gosh, for as long as social media has been around, kids and teenagers have been struggling to deal with it, and parents too, because as parents, we're trying to figure out how do we support our kids. But it's when I think back to when I grew up and or before social media times, there was this nice separation between school and home, and so you you know and the only access you had to media was really broadcast media. So things like this, like TV programs, and then occasionally print media like magazines. And so you had limited access to you know, images of supermodels, images of celebrities, images of your friends, and it wasn't bombarding you around the clock. And it was a lot easier to keep space and time.
And I know that's something where, we look back at kids even just 10 years ago and, the way they do their makeup or the way they wear clothes and things, that's even changed with social media as you sort of get more into the trends and wrapped up in sort of what's happening. I know that there are so many things that we can talk about with this. I think the first thing is, what are the first tips, I guess I would say, that you give parents or children sort of in navigating this world?
Yeah, I want to be careful not to paint it as all bad. I think,
Absolutely.
there's so many potential benefits of platforms like YouTube and social media for sharing positive information, for sharing education. I mean, even like the makeup tutorials you were talking about, it's so much easier to access information in a way that's easily digestible. And that's a great thing. Social media can also be a way for kids who have trouble socially connecting with other kids to be able to find people with shared and common interests. So it can be really positive for a lot of people in that sense. And then, you know, I think we always have to be aware of potential risks. And so, just like with anything, it's important to ask kids, first of all, what platforms are they using? What social media, are they on TikTok? Are they on Instagram? Are they on Snapchat? What sort of things are they doing? How much time are they spending on it every day? And anytime you ask that, I think all of us tend to underestimate and aren't aware of how much time we spend. And so it can be helpful to have various programs on your phone or on your tablet that kind of keep track of your screen time, so you can realize, wow, I'm spending 2 or 3 hours or even more on social media. So what are you doing? How much time are you spending? And then the final question is, how do you feel when you're done? Or how do you feel while you're doing this? Is it a positive experience where you're laughing at cat videos and feeling like you're learning things or connecting with friends? Or are you having a little bit of FOMO? Do you feel like, wow, I'm seeing these images of my friends all doing fun things without me? I'm I feel kind of inadequate because I'm seeing these pictures of, these celebrities or influencers who don't look like me and make me feel uncomfortable about my body or about my choices or about whatever I'm doing. So um, that ability to self-reflect and to sort of pay attention to take your own pulse and pay attention to how you feel after you use social media is really important and can help kids motivate themselves to make different choices.
And at that point, that critical thinking skill, I mean, when does that really develop in kids? Is that sort of case by case, or is there sort of an area of time around maybe puberty where they sort of start developing that? Because that's really hard to be able to take a pause of what you're seeing and kind of evaluate.
Yeah, and I mean that's where parents come in. So for younger kids, they're not doing a lot of self-reflection, and even some adults we don't do a lot of self-reflection. And so as with teenagers, you would expect they would be capable of that for sure. Preteens, it really will depend on the child. And so for teenagers, they should be able to stop and say, how does this make me feel? And again, some of this has to do with emotional intelligence. And some people are really in touch with their emotions and are able to say, okay, this is what I feel, and maybe this is why I feel that. But that requires a level of sophistication that sometimes we don't see until late adolescence. So older teens and even people in their 20s. So for our younger kids, it's important to get parents or a trusted one involved to be able to help them navigate that and say, okay, to be able to reflect and say, wow, I see like you look pretty angry. Like you just slammed your water bottle down on the counter. Like that tells me that maybe you're not feeling well inside. I wonder if that has anything to do with what you were just doing, playing the video game or watching, scrolling on social media.
Right, and making those connections for them so they might understand why they're having that feeling, whether, honestly,
Mhm.
whether it's good or bad, and sort of be able to
Yeah.
register the difference.
Yeah, and I mean, and this is all part of also just in general helping kids grow in emotional intelligence and recognize feelings. So as you put it, Sarah, if they're feeling really great, like you notice them laughing and say, "Oh my gosh, you're laughing. It looks like, something must be funny. What is that? Why don't you share it and we can talk about it?" Or, "Oh, I don't know, it's some silly video that somebody posted, but I think it's funny and it makes me happy." Well, that's great. It seems like this channel or whatever you're, looking at is a really positive thing for you. And that, just feeding that back and reflecting that back to the kids can be helpful.
And I know that it's impossible to be over your kid's shoulder looking at their phone or their computer every ounce of the day, especially, as it is used for schoolwork. I'm sure, there's access at school, of course. But, to have that sort of lens to help start framing you when you're in those younger stages, how important is that for parents to sort of be involved and understand what their kid is using, those apps? I don't know if that's their own digital literacy, understanding the technology, or just sort of helping them with their emotions.
Yeah, I think it's really important for as parents to be, of kids of any age and teenagers to be very much aware of how much time they're spending on social media and if possible, which particular sites that they're using. And there are all sorts of programs that you can get and even things you can pay for to try to limit your child's access to certain sites. But as a universal recommendation, two things that I like to tell parents. One is, whatever what smartphone you have has a way of monitoring screen time and creating a family with you and your child so that you can easily see any day of the week how many hours are they spending on their phones. And it'll even break it down and say how much of this time is on what they call productivity. Like, are they, I don't know, doing something for schoolwork and how much of this time is social media. And so you can really quickly monitor that and potentially set limits. The second thing that I recommend for families is to check out the American Academy of Pediatrics has a family media use plan that's a little bit of a contract, but it starts a conversation between parents and children about how much time they're going to be spending on their devices, which types of sites are okay and safe, and what is safe in behavior, and then what's not. And then even making particular rules about, are we going to have access to screens at meals and things like that. And so for parents who may feel uncomfortable talking to teens about social media or don't even know where to start, just having this structured guide as almost like an outline for having a conversation with your teen can be really helpful.
Absolutely. And, I want to talk about, social media right now. It's not just a highlight reel, but that's one way on some of the apps that it feels, as if, I'll say Instagram, for example, photos you post. Right now, people are posting videos of where they got into college, very relevant for those teens graduating soon. Navigating that, and I'm sure this applies to a lot of other issues, within, within mental health, but how do you sort of give your kid, that confidence maybe internally from these external factors? I guess that's the same case with friendships and friend groups at school and things like that. But how important is developing that internal, sense of self?
Yeah, there's such a tendency for all of us to engage in comparison. And, whether we're seeing our friends wearing their new college sweatshirts or we're seeing the highlight reels of our peers looking amazing on their spring break vacations, it's our natural tendency is to say, like, what's wrong with me? Or why do I not have that? Or what's different about me? And so knowing that that's just a normal part of being human is important to share with our kids. And then being able to have the type of relationship with your kid or your teen where you can have can have open communication and be able to talk about, what are you thinking right now? And when you see, I noticed that when you saw that photo or, when your friend got into this one place, how did that make you feel? And to allow them to have an open space where they can honestly communicate, like, yeah, I'm kind of bummed. I wanted to go there or that. And as a parent, one of the things that we work on in our sessions with families is to really just allow kids to vent to some extent and to be, instead of trying to fix their problems, listen to them and sometimes even validate. Yeah, that stinks. Like I know in some ways I know what you're experiencing. Like I saw those pictures of my friends on sailboats in the Caribbean last week and thought, oh my gosh, I'm at work. Like they look like they're
Right,
having
exactly.
more fun than I am. And it's normal to compare yourself and to feel that way. And then also to kind of recenter on, we're on our own journey right now and we have different goals and different priorities. And right now your priorities or whatever they are. And, you're doing a great job with that. And just, yeah, to be able to just end it in that way and recognize like everybody's in a different place and they're like sometimes literally in a different place doing different things, and that's okay. And where you are is great, and let's just focus on what are your goals, what are your priorities, and how you can get there.
And some of this content, of course, is real, right? It's in their social circle, it's in their school, but have you had started to have conversations about fake content or fake things that you see online or maybe dangerous things kids see online and sort of navigating that aspect of the internet right now?
Yeah, I mean, most of I'm not sure. Are you guys familiar with TikTok ticks? Have you heard about
I
that?
haven't. Maybe that
Okay,
says something about my
so
age, but yeah.
well, so this is a big thing in social media and mental health from a clinical side, but basically, what we've noticed in mental health is that there were a number of videos and information on TikTok showing people having what they said were a type of tick, like a motor tick, except that was not medically true at all, and they were just sort of things that people were making up. And so what would happen is we would get our patients and families come into our office saying, I think I have this tick. And they do some like bizarre over the top movement that is not typically seen with a motor tick. And, very often it would open the conversation. That's so interesting. What makes you think that you have that? Tell me more about it. Where did you see it? And what happened is they would end up with realizing it or not, but basically miming and kind of parroting or repeating these movements that they saw on TikTok that they were told were ticks. And so we saw this across the country in our practices, and it's 100% came from exposure to social media. It's not a true medical while ticks are a true neurologic phenomenon for sure, this manifestation of what people thought were ticks was something very different. And so that was the opportunity for us to open the conversation and say, hey, where did you see that? And, for example, one of my patients would say, oh yeah, I saw it on TikTok. And, then you say, okay, it's a great opportunity to talk about. There's a lot of great information out there. It's important to be able to figure out what's real and what's not. And, what I can tell you is from a medical standpoint, these things are not what we consider whatever ticks, traditional motor tics or vocal tics. But let's keep an eye on this anyway, on whatever's going on, because, clearly this is a sign that you're experiencing some stress or something's going on. So let's talk about that.
And how
So,
troubling was that for it to present itself like that and for you all to see this sort of moving across the country?
yeah, I think for us in mental health, that was the first really concrete, obvious example that something of the pervasive and powerful influence of social media on our kids. So that it was almost unbelievable, because I don't know, I think it was shocking and it was a little scary because, we know that all what we consume, like the food we put in our bodies, and also like our media diet, everything that we're seeing in our eyes and taking in affects our growth and affects our body and affects the way we think. And so um, that it was a good reminder that we need to, as professionals, we need to be more thoughtful about learning more about what are our kids doing, what are they spending their time learning, and where is this information coming from.
Wow, and that's amazing too, because I guess to my perspective, I assume, they have sort of, as you word, media diet. They focused a lot of their time on this social media app, on TikTok, looking at different things like this, and it sort of infiltrated them, in a way, which is interesting because, I think we think of TikTok and the diversity of information you can get and, the diversity of fake images and people, but to get one thing very concentrated is really interesting.
Yeah. And um, yeah, and it's so fascinating because like there's the social media completely has the potential to be able to share a lot of really helpful information, and potentially I think in some ways it may be helpful to destigmatize mental health problems, and make people feel more comfortable about going to therapy, about talking with a psychiatrist, about taking medication when you need it, um, for mental health problems. And so I don't want to paint it all as bad, and that just like everything, it's about moderation and kind of as parents or as adults, keeping our eyes on what's going on with our kids and screens.
Sure. I mean, I've seen examples of people sort of normalizing ostomy bags or normalizing maybe different routines, that they have to handle their mental health or handle sort of the days at school, or if they're missing something, or I just think there is this normalization that can happen. I guess it's teaching the kids, to your point earlier, the skills to be able to sort of get through all these videos or the information and actually be able to digest the good parts out of it or search for the correct thing, because the algorithms can give you some crazy content when you're sort of looking on all of these apps, whether it's Twitter or TikTok or Instagram. So sort of being able to navigate all of that with a good head on your shoulders.
Yeah. And, you know, from my own experience, I think what's really helpful and can be empowering for our teens and kids is the practice of unfollowing and, not reflexively liking. And so we know from the algorithms that what you spend your time looking at and what you heart and like, that's the type of content that you're going to get fed more of. And so if you're seeing things where you're like, oh, I don't like that, or that's awful, empower kids to scroll past that and, definitely not to like it. And, or if there are accounts that keep popping up for them and they're thinking, I don't like this at all, making sure that they unfollow or, if needed, block certain accounts. And so giving them the sense of autonomy to be able to make choices about what are you putting into your mind? What is your diet?
And developing that autonomy, I'm sure, especially as a teen, is so important. As if kids are going off to college or sort of developing on their own, they need that foundation. You're not always going to be able to potentially look over again your kids' shoulders or sort of help them navigate that.
Yeah. And so, starting early by helping them navigate that, setting limits on screen time and sort of, ideal usage of media, and then being able to gradually give them more autonomy, step back as is appropriate, and as they get older, knowing that the ultimate goal is we're raising adults here. And so we want them to be able to be empowered to make their own choices and ideally make good choices, as many of them as they can. And then to know what to do, if they don't make a good choice, to recognize, to try to course correct.
And I do want to recognize one thing, and somebody put a comment in the chat, just about not allowing their kids to use social media. And that's something I've heard forever. I think even when Facebook was the big app, when I was back in high school, but there were limits, to people maybe waiting to make an account or sort of waiting so they have developed a little bit more to be able to explore those. I'm not saying that there's a right or wrong answer, but have you heard benefits to potentially waiting until kids are later to sort of have these interactions?
Yes, I think it's tricky. I mean, if we're talking specifically about social media, I think delaying access to social media until your kid is mature makes complete sense. And every kid is a little bit different. I we've got one of our kids is a teenager at home, and I'm trying to delay his access to social media inevitably, or like in uh forever, basically, if at all
Right.
possible. Um, and we've had a lot of conversations about this. And so, what's really interesting is that some of our larger studies looking at the association between social media and anxiety and depression have really talked about, in teenagers, there's the social media is a double-edged sword. And so basically kids who are, let's say they're mid-teens, in ninth or 10th or 11th grade in high school, and they're not at all on social media and or connected in any way, that there is the potential that they will feel a little left out or excluded if every other person on their whole grade is, using a particular app. Um, but what we also know is the more time you're spending on these apps, as you spend an hour or two or more a day, spending time on social media increases your risk, or is associated with an increased risk of anxiety, of depression. If you're a girl, you're particularly sensitive to these effects, and it can cause sort of distorted body image and lower self-esteem. And so as parents, you're walking this tightrope and trying to figure out, like, where do I go with this? And, obviously trying to delay or limit use of social media until your child is mature makes complete sense. And at the point where you feel like it's a good time for them to start to use, trying to monitor as much as possible. Again, thinking back to our ultimate goal is our child is graduating high school and is becoming an adult. And at that point, they need to learn how to use this, and they may not have us looking over their shoulders while they're on their phone. And so you do want to have some exposure and some time where your child or your teenager is using social media before they leave, where you're able to monitor it. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. No, I completely understand. I mean, it's finding that balance, and I guess everyone knows their individual child. Some people do just ultimately have a different sense of self and different levels of critical thinking, and they might not have the fear of missing out the same way. And then other kids are different. I mean, it probably also depends on, again, what you said. Your friend group, are they all on social media? How are they communicating with each other? So I think that's really interesting, and obviously a very dynamic process, for parents to sort of sift through all of that.
Yeah, definitely. And, I completely agree with recommendations to certainly wait until they're teenagers. I think, it's the data we have is wild. Something like 80 to 90% of US teens report that they're on social media, and 1 out of 3 of them say that they're on social media constantly, which is wild. And even though social media is supposed to be not available for children under 13, our surveys will say that kids 8 to 12 years old, about 40% of them are already
Mm.
on social media apps. And so it is, as parents, this is so hard because you want to teach your kids literacy and, social media literacy rather, and how to navigate these challenging situations. And also you don't want them exposed to all of this at a young age.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot to get through. And then you bringing up, of course, the body image part that we briefly mentioned at the beginning, that could be a whole, conversation, obviously, on its own and the impacts of that. And I know that we don't have too much time to delve into that today, but I think, what a huge impression that could leave, especially on those kids going off on their own and trying to figure out who they are and how to dress and sort of navigate themselves. But you're also seeing these people, whether fake or not, right? And sort of their image that they have online.
Yeah, exactly. All the like the airbrushed
Right.
images
All the
or
editing and filters, right? And you don't always know exactly what the person online has done. I think, there's
yeah,
some transparency on some apps, but that is not across the board, of course.
yeah, exactly. And so, the more we talk about this, the more it makes me think if kids are spending hours and hours looking at these images and thinking about these things on social media, like that's the message that they're hearing in their ears and they're seeing in their eyes. We as parents and as trusted adults, we need to be talking to them even more than we already are, because we've got to sort of counter this social force that they're up against, so that we can say, hey, I don't know if you know, but a lot of those, let's say teenage girls that you're looking at, like they're airbrushed images, or they have somebody professional who does their hair and they pay however much money to do that. Like this is not necessarily a realistic image of what your day-to-day life is going to be. And the bodybuilders that, I don't know, like, how much of that is real and how much of that is fake. These are important conversations to be able to have with your kids.
Right. So it seems that, not just to simplify it, it's definitely a little bit more dynamic than this, but it really boils down to having those conversations, being open about it, and sort of talking about their feelings, which I know is not easy for every teenager to sort of discuss, their feelings with their parents, but certainly the effort, to try and sort of maybe debunk some of the fake things and also sort of lift up maybe the more positive items.
Yeah. And just the one last tip about having the conversations. One of my colleagues has this great recommendation about talking to teenagers. And she says, if you have a car and you're driving your child somewhere, which I feel like we are always doing to and from various activities, that is a great time to have a conversation because it's less threatening for the kid. Like you're not staring at them, making intense eye contact. You're just sort of like listening to music. They're a little distracted. And if, that can be a really good time to just be like, hey, I just want to check in. How's this thing going? Or I'm just curious, like, tell me, ask questions in a non-judgmental way. Like, I'm just curious, which social media sites are you on? I was listening to this talk today and I just didn't know. Tell me what you like about it. And is there anything you don't like about it? And, that's a nice way to open the conversation with them.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Fluco, thank you so much for speaking with me today and, giving all these very helpful tips. Obviously, and I say this just about every conversation, there's so many other avenues we could go with this and so much more to sort of debunk. But I think these are great steps, for whatever social media situation and also some of those just in the world conversations, that those kids need to have.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me, Sarah, and thanks for covering this really important topic.
Absolutely. And to anyone watching, this will be available after the live ends on wavy.com and still on Facebook and YouTube. So feel free to go to wavy.com. The link is right here in the chat on YouTube and Facebook to, view more resources from CHKD and also find out more information. So thank you so much for watching today. And thank you, Dr. Fluco, for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Take care.